What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about a warm-up, the efficiency of, and what an optimal warm-up is. Unfortunately, my camera no longer works, so I was recently in a motorcycle accident. For that, I apologize, and hopefully we'll get that resolved fairly soon. As typical, we'll start with our story of the day. This one is a very good story based off of the early 80s, and it's about the difference of being the best on the team versus the best for the team. So as we get out into the world and start our careers or join up with different organizations, one thing that we got to remember and take with us is there's an inherent difference in being the best for the team and the best on the team. And which one is more important to you should be where you put your focus in. So feel free to read that, take the lesson away from it, understand how it applies to everyday life and not just in terms of this specific story. So we'll get into what a purpose of a warm-up. The number one purpose is to prevent injury and to maximize the efficiency of a warm-up. So a warm-up is performed prior to the main exercise session, which is why I say warm-up. It is done to decrease the chance of injury and increase the effectiveness of the main exercise session. The way it does that is through neurological ramping or increase of neurological threshold, which we'll get into a little bit later. They should always be performed. And they require focus and specific attention. So gone are the days of the typical bro warm-up where we walk in, put 135 on the bar and just start benching it as we increase in weight to get to our working sets. There's a little bit more needs to be done and goes into it. It's much more definite and specific focus put into it. If you've ever seen a very high-level athlete training, even if they're just doing a recovery day, they have a very strict warm-up protocol that they go through that is relevant and relative to them and has been working for them up to the point where they are. What does warm-up do? Increases core body temperature, increases tissue temperature. What that will do is make the tissue a little bit more or a little bit less plastic, a little bit more malleable. It'll decrease the resistance from the peripheral blood vessels. Preps the CNS, the central nervous system, by recruiting motor units that will be used in the main exercise session. Moves joints to their full range of motion or specific range of motion to that exercise. Provides practice for the exercise that will be performed in the main session. So this is kind of the three-step process right here if we want to look at it. First thing we want to do is just increase the temperature. That's the temperature of the core, the temperature of the tissue, the temperature of the blood, just like starting your car and letting it idle to warm up the oil. Then you want to prep the nervous system by recruiting the specific motor units that we're going to be using. So if that day is a squat day, we're going to try to fire up the motor units of the larger leg musculature, hamstrings, glutes, and quads. And then we're going to move the joints to the full range of motion and practice the exercise. That's when we get to the squatting with an empty bar or performing the motion as similar to what we are going to actually do for the main exercise session. Programming the warm-up. It can vary in duration, but it should last around 20 minutes. That's a loose rule. Time is not of the main concern or the main priority when it comes to a warm-up. It's really the amount of time it takes to accomplish the three objectives. Duration is not the only thing to consider. Just keep that in mind, highlight that. Determine the muscles, joints, intensity, and body movements that we perform during the main exercise session. If it's going to be an exercise session that requires a significant amount of strength or mental effort or intent, call it a squat session or deadlift session, any main compound exercise where we're working above 85% intensity, we want to develop a ramping system to get up to that to increase the potentiation. Generally speaking, we're looking for 5 to 10 minutes of just movement and increasing the temperature of the tissue and core. Then we're looking for a specific bout or specific focus warm-up of 8 to 12 minutes. So it's two components. We have our general and specific. That's very important. The general 5 to 10 minutes, specific 8 to 12 minutes. The majority of our warm-up time should be spent on the specific warm-up, which is the joint range of motion, the nervous system firing, so the CNS, and practicing the actual movement. And then 5 to 10 minutes before that, obviously, just general movement and increase in temperature. General warm-up goals: gradually increase the tissue fluid and core temperature. Why? Decreases the chance of getting injured because it makes the tissues more malleable. It increases our flexibility, decreases viscosity of the joint fluid, encourages the blood flow, which brings nutrients, gradual increase in heart rate, as opposed to all of a sudden we're going from 0 to 100. With the flexibility, I just want to hit on this topic a little bit more. The increased tissue flexibility, we're not talking in terms of being a gymnast, we're talking getting our body prepared for our current range of motion. So if we just got out of bed and we're going into the gym, our current our current flexibility, our current range of motion is going to change a little bit. So as we get a little bit more warm, we're going to get a little bit more flexible. But it's not to say we're gaining absolute flexibility in our bodies, in our physiology. We want to make that very clear. We are just getting to our current physiological flexibility. So we're just making the tissues a little bit more malleable, a little bit less plastic. The gradual increase in heart rate is important to note as well. It's not a sudden increase in heart rate, as we want to give the body time to adjust. Less shock is always good. How do we accomplish a warm up? Literally anything that will increase our temperature. Walking, jogging, bike, rowing, hot tub, sauna, turning the heat on in the car on your way to your gym, on the way to the gym if it's hot enough and a long enough drive. It's all it's meant to do is just to increase the temperature, and it should last for about 5 to 10 minutes. A specific warm up, much more obviously specific, much narrower of our lens. We're trying to prep the central nervous system. We want to move the joints through full range of motion. We want to provide practice of the movement. How do we do this? We perform movements that mimic it, that will be in the main exercise session at a lower intensity. So we talked about a little bit earlier of ramping up. If squatting is planned, then we squat. If bench press is planned, then we bench. So the little tagline down here, if you're not familiar with Matt Winning, he's a world record holder in a couple of different categories. And he has, in a sense, branded pre-pump as a winning warm-up. So put his last name on it and said it was his original idea. Whether it is or it isn't is semantics, but what we're talking about is essentially what he will do is 4 sets of 20 reps of similar joint activity. So if the main exercise session is a bench session, he'll do 2 exercises for the upper back, 1 exercise for the shoulder, 1 exercise for the pecs and triceps, and do 4 sets of 20 in circuit fashion at a very light intensity. Call it 10 to 30% of your 1 rep max. So essentially you're doing 80 to 100 reps before you ever get to a bar. The theory behind this is that it will fully lubricate the joints. It will force a lot of blood, or request a lot of blood, to the working areas to help prevent injury and increase tissue flexibility. And it will also be a good way to sneak in volume accumulation into your programming. By performing the movements that will be trained in the main session, it does 3 things. What are those 3 things? Preps the CNS, moves joints to their full range of motion, provides practice of movement. So we talked a little bit about it. The way we would structure a warm-up, say we were going to squat, the way we'd structure the warm-up is we would spend 5 to 10 minutes doing soft tissue manipulation, or at least this is how we do it. I'm very careful saying this is the way or versus this is a way. One of the ways that we do this is soft tissue manipulation. That's foam rolling or trying to work out any specific tight areas or trouble areas, and then getting general blood flow to increasing the core temperature through 5 minutes of aerobic. You can get really creative with this. So if your triceps are a little bit lagging behind the rest of your pressing motions, you can take a ski ergometer, which is a machine we can go over a little bit later, cross the handles over and just use the triceps. So you're doing light movement, but specific movement for the triceps. Now, if we were squatting, you could do the same thing on the bike, doing the fan bike without your arms. So you're putting more of the emphasis on your legs. So the downside is if their fitness level is already low, then this would fatigue them out and may not be a good usage. If they have generally a little bit higher level of fitness, then this is a good way to get in accumulation or build volume. And after 5 minutes of increasing their blood flow and temperature, then we do start doing more specific movements, prepping them for actually squatting. And some of those movements would be body weight lunges or body weight Bulgarian, split squat lunges, 45-degree hypers, reverse hypers, all at low intensities, preparing the organism to be loaded higher. So you start very, very low intensity, and then you work your way up to at or just above your working intensity. So if you were going to go for a 90% of your 1 rep max for 2 sets of 2 singles, then it would be recommended that you work up to about 80-85% of your 1 rep max in your warm-ups before getting to your working set. And all you're doing is preparing the nervous system. Once again, you're taking away that shock factor. The art kind of comes in with navigating the client or your own level of fitness so that you don't get too fatigued before you get to your working sets. The last thing you want to do if you have a low level of fitness is out warm up your working sets. If that makes sense. Special considerations we have are previous injuries, known tightness areas for the individual or the sport. So if you were, I work a lot with tactical athletes. So if I had a tactical athlete, a new tactical athlete coming to me and wanted to train, then I would build into their warm-ups using the pre-pump or the winning warm-ups around common areas of joint injury for his line of work. If he's a firefighter, it's low back, it's hips, it's knees, ankles, and shoulders. So I'd build in a couple of exercises to get volume into those areas to help loosen up. So help lubricate, help increase the flexibility of those areas a little bit, and also building up their specific endurance of those muscles. Some people call this term prehab or use the term prehab to blanket that term. We have a YouTube link here. Feel free to follow up and go on to effective pre-exhaustion on the patterns of muscular activity in the flat bench press. We linked a research article for, and then I tagged another YouTube link in here of the Army's dynamic warm-up. So I was in the Army for 8 years, and we have changed the way we used to do physical fitness versus the way we do physical fitness now, and to include a dynamic warm-up. Some of the research that we mentioned in earlier that was in the considerations listed here, and another couple of links for structured warm-ups that we'll go over in the next video.